The year is 2026, and the most important mineral on Earth just got weaponized. In October 2025, China slapped export controls on lithium batteries, cathode materials, and the processing technology needed to make them. For about 3 weeks, the global green economy held its breath. Then Beijing hit pause, suspending the controls for 1 year as part of a trade truce with the United States. But let's get one thing straight. That wasn't mercy. That was a warning shot. Because the uncomfortable truth that nobody in Washington, Brussels, or Tokyo wants to say out loud is this. The entire green revolution, every electric car, every solar battery, every grid storage system that is supposed to save the planet from climate catastrophe, runs on a supply chain that one country controls from mine to battery pack. And that country isn't yours. How do you build a trillion-dollar industry on a mineral that takes 500,000 gallons of water to extract 1 ton? How do you promise a green future while draining the last water from indigenous communities in the driest desert on Earth? How do you declare energy independence while 70% of your supply chain runs through Beijing? And how does the lightest metal on the periodic table become the heaviest chain around the neck of every Western economy? Today, we are not just talking about batteries. We are conducting a forensic audit of the most dangerous bottleneck in the global economy. This is the bill for the green transition, and somebody has been cooking the books. This is the lithium trap, or how the world bet its future on a mineral it doesn't control. To understand why lithium is the new oil, you have to understand what lithium actually is and why the planet suddenly can't get enough of it. Lithium is the lightest metal on the periodic table. It is soft enough to cut with a knife, and it has one property that makes it irreplaceable. It stores energy better than almost anything else on Earth, relative to its weight. That single property has turned a mineral that was once mainly used in ceramics and psychiatric medication into the most strategically important element of the 21st century. Every electric vehicle battery needs it. Every smartphone battery needs it. Every grid-scale energy storage system that backs up a solar farm or a wind turbine needs it. Every laptop, every power tool, every military drone without lithium, the green transition doesn't just slow down, it stops. The lights go out, the cars don't move, the grid storage that is supposed to replace coal plants sits empty. And it is not just about climate change anymore. Lithium is now a matter of national defense. The F-35 fighter jet uses lithium batteries. Naval submarines use them. Military communications equipment runs on them. When the Pentagon talks about critical mineral supply chains, lithium sits at the top of the list right next to rare earth elements. The mineral that powers your phone also powers the weapons that defend your country, and almost all of it runs through China. In 2020, global electric vehicle sales were 3 million units. By 2024, that number hit 17 million. Just the additional 3.5 million electric cars sold in 2024, compared with the previous year, is more than the total number of electric vehicles sold worldwide in 2020. Let that land. The growth in a single year exceeded the entire market 4 years earlier. In China, electric cars now account for almost half of all car sales. 1 in 10 cars on Chinese roads is now electric. The International Energy Agency projects 40 million electric cars could be sold annually by 2030. Every single one of those vehicles needs between 8 and 12 kilograms of lithium in its battery. And that is just the cars. Grid-scale energy storage, the batteries that keep the lights on when the sun goes down, is growing at 44% per year. Energy storage is set to account for about a quarter of total global battery demand in 2025, and that share is rising fast. In the United States alone, energy storage is expected to make up 35 to 40% of battery demand in the next few years. Albemarle, the world's largest lithium producer, forecasts global demand reaching 1.8 million tons of lithium carbonate equivalent in 2025, doubling to 3.7 million tons by 2030. Electric vehicles now account for nearly 90% of lithium demand, up from 64% in 2020. The IEA says lithium demand for clean energy technologies will rise more than 5 times by 2040. The International Energy Agency projects a 40% lithium supply shortfall by 2035 under current policies. Let me repeat that. The agency responsible for tracking global energy says we will not have enough lithium to meet our own climate targets in a decade. So where does this miracle mineral come from? That is where the story gets uncomfortable. Here is the first nail in the coffin: the geographic lottery. Lithium isn't evenly distributed across the planet. It is concentrated in some of the most geologically awkward, politically fragile, and ecologically sensitive places on Earth. The United States Geological Survey estimates global identified lithium resources at roughly 115 million tons. And the distribution reads like a geopolitical headache, like someone designed a strategic nightmare on purpose. Argentina holds 23 million tons of resources. Bolivia holds 23 million tons. Chile holds 11 million tons. Together, these three countries form what the industry calls the lithium triangle, a crescent of salt flats high in the Andes that contains over 50% of the world's identified lithium. These are three countries with three very different political systems, three different approaches to foreign investment, and a shared history of economic instability. Australia holds 8.9 million tons, mostly in hard rock spodumene deposits in Western Australia. China holds 6.8 million tons and has been aggressively expanding, with reports in early 2025 claiming Chinese deposits now account for 16.5% of global resources, up from 6% thanks to the discovery of a 2,800-kilometer lithium belt in its western regions. And the United States 1.8 million tons in proven reserves. Though a recent USGS discovery in the Smackover Formation in Arkansas could contain 5 to 19 million tons, an amount that exceeds global demand by 2030 about ninefold. But that lithium is trapped in brine deep underground, and turning discovery into production takes years. But here is the catch that makes this a trap rather than merely a challenge. Having the lithium in the ground is only half the equation. You also have to get it out. And that is where everything falls apart. Bolivia sits on the world's largest lithium resource, 23 million tons beneath the Salar de Uyuni. On paper, it should be the Saudi Arabia of lithium. In reality, it produced 600 tons in 2023, not 600,600. Why? Political instability, failed joint ventures with German and Chinese companies, infrastructure that barely exists, and extraction challenges that make the lithium commercially unviable at scale. Bolivia is a billionaire who can't find the key to his own vault. Meanwhile, Argentina next door has 7 operating lithium plants and is scaling fast, with installed production capacity surging from 35,000 tons per year to 186,000 tons. In the first half of 2025, Argentina produced over 50,000 tons, with projections to close the year at 115,000. Chile has the most commercially viable reserves and the highest brine concentrations in the world. It produced 49,000 tons in 2024. But the government announced plans to nationalize its lithium industry in 2023, spooking investors and creating uncertainty about who actually controls the resource going forward. In early 2025, Chile received 7 bids for lithium operation contracts. But the path from bid to production is measured in years, not months. And Australia, it is the world's largest producer at 88,000 tons in 2024. But its lithium comes from hard rock mining, which is 3 times as carbon-intensive as brine extraction. The irony of mining a mineral to fight climate change using a method that accelerates climate change. Welcome to the lithium paradox. This is nail number 2, the refining chokehold. If the geographic distribution of lithium is a headache, the processing concentration is a full-blown migraine, because it does not matter who digs the lithium out of the ground if one country controls the factory that turns raw material into a usable battery chemical, and that country is China. Despite holding less than 8% of the world's lithium reserves, China controls approximately 65 to 70% of global lithium chemical processing, 78% of cathode production, 75% of global battery cell manufacturing, and 85% of the world's battery anodes. Let me put that in a way that actually hits you. Australia mines the lithium, Chile mines the lithium, Argentina mines the lithium, and then almost all of it gets shipped to China, where Chinese companies refine it into battery-grade lithium carbonate or lithium hydroxide, manufacture it into cathodes and anodes, assemble it into battery cells, and often ship those cells back to the countries that mined the raw material in the first place. Imagine you own a wheat farm. You grow the wheat, but you have to send all your wheat to someone else's bakery to be turned into bread. And then you buy the bread back at 10 times the price. That is the global lithium supply chain. Australia digs it up, Chile digs it up, and China turns it into the thing that actually has value. The raw lithium is worth maybe $5,000 to $8,000 per metric ton to produce. The finished battery-grade chemicals can sell for 10 times that. The batteries themselves are worth even more, and the electric vehicles containing those batteries. That is where the real margin lives. China didn't just capture the refining step. They captured the entire value curve. And here is the part that really stings. Australia ships almost all its lithium exports to China. Not some, not most, almost all. The world's largest lithium producer sends its raw material to the world's largest lithium processor, and neither the producer nor the consuming nations at the end of the chain seem to have a viable plan to change that. China didn't stumble into this position. They built it, methodically, over 2 decades. While Western governments were debating whether climate change was real, Beijing was executing a strategy with surgical precision. From 2009 to 2014, China shifted towards systemic promotion of new energy vehicles with the Strategic Emerging Industries Program. The Made in China 2025 plan explicitly targeted battery supply chain dominance. Then came the battery whitelist, a masterclass in protectionism. Subsidies were reserved exclusively for domestic battery producers, shutting out foreign competitors while Chinese companies scaled behind a wall of government money. State subsidies flooded Chinese battery manufacturers. The government provided cheap coal energy to power energy-intensive refining. It offered below-market financing for companies buying mines overseas. It created special economic zones for battery production. Companies like CATL and BYD scaled to gargantuan proportions. And Chinese firms like Ganfeng Lithium and Tianqi Lithium used a strategy called off-take contracts to lock up supply. Here is how it works. Processing plants are much larger in scale than individual mines. They need guaranteed feedstock. So the processing plant owner offers to fund the mine's development in exchange for a long-term supply agreement. Most of those processing plants are Chinese-owned, which means the mines, no matter what country they sit in, are effectively feeding a Chinese factory. 6 of the world's top 10 lithium-ion battery manufacturers are Chinese. CATL alone commands roughly 35% of the global market. In 2024, China produced more than 1,200 gigawatt-hours of lithium-ion batteries. That is 3/4 of the entire world's output. The U.S. Energy Information Administration puts it bluntly: China processes over 90% of the world's graphite and accounts for over 2/3 of global cobalt and lithium processing capacity, and they have been tightening the screws. This is nail number 3. The weaponization of the supply chain. In July 2025, China restricted the export of lithium processing technologies, including the preparation methods for lithium carbonate and lithium hydroxide. The crown jewels. Then on October 9, 2025, Beijing dropped the hammer. New export controls covered lithium batteries, cathode materials, anode materials, and related production equipment and technology. Not just the finished product, the knowledge of how to make it. Think about that for a second. It is one thing to control the supply of batteries. It is another thing entirely to control the export of the technology needed to build battery factories. That is like controlling the recipe, not just the cake. If you can't export the technology, no one else can build the bakery. The IEA noted that in some supply chain segments, particularly precursor cathode materials and lithium iron phosphate cathode materials, China maintains a near monopoly with market shares above 95%. When those October export controls hit, the impact was immediate. Carmakers in the United States and Europe struggled to obtain permanent magnets. Some factories cut utilization rates. Others temporarily shut down. Rare earth prices in Europe surged to 6 times the level inside China. The supply chains that were supposed to be resilient shattered like glass. under a hammer. Now Beijing did suspend most of those controls in November 2025 as part of a broader trade deal with Washington following the Trump and Xi meeting in Busan, South Korea. But here is the part that should keep you up at night. They suspended them for 1 year until November 2026. The infrastructure of control is still in place. The legal framework is intact. The sword is sheathed, not destroyed, and the IEA noted something chilling. This is no longer just a theoretical concern. The proliferation of export controls on key materials and technologies underscores, once again, the vulnerabilities and risks. The supply of rare earths remains among the least geographically diversified among all critical minerals. For a remarkable 19 out of 20 important strategic minerals, China is the leading refiner, with an average market share of 70%. And that concentration has only intensified in recent years. This is the equivalent of a hostage negotiator putting the gun down during talks. You feel relieved, but you know the gun is still in the room. And that is the trap. The entire Western world's climate strategy, its automotive industry, its energy storage ambitions, all of it depends on a supply chain that can be switched off with a single announcement from Beijing. But if you think the geopolitical chokehold is bad, wait until you hear what lithium extraction is doing to the places where it is actually mined, because the green revolution has a dirty secret, and it is measured in gallons. This is nail number 4, the water paradox. Here is the great irony of the green transition. Lithium is supposed to save the planet from climate change, but extracting it is destroying some of the most fragile ecosystems on Earth. In South America's Lithium Triangle, the primary extraction method involves pumping lithium-rich brine from underground aquifers to the surface and letting it evaporate in massive ponds. This process consumes approximately 500,000 gallons of water per ton of lithium extracted, 500,000 gallons per ton. In the driest desert on Earth, Chile Salar de Atacama, where the majority of the country's lithium has been extracted since the 1980s, has seen a 30% reduction in water levels. Lagoons have disappeared, vegetation has died, flamingo populations have declined. The indigenous Licanante people who have lived there for centuries are watching their ancestral homeland literally dry up. In Chile's Atacama region, lithium mining has consumed 65% of the region's water supply. Indigenous communities in Argentina report that the diversion of fresh water for lithium production has dried up valleys where they once raised llamas, goats, and sheep. Farming has become impossible in areas where families have lived for generations. One Argentine activist described how the Trapiche River, once used by his family for their livestock, simply stopped flowing after lithium operations began. Quote, "It was beautiful, but today there are no animals because it is all dry." A new report from the Citizen Observatory of Chile found that the brine evaporation method causes irreversible and unrecoverable loss of water from aquifers. That word, irreversible, is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. It means the water is not coming back. Not in a year, not in a century. Think about the mathematics of hypocrisy. We need lithium to build batteries to fight climate change. To get the lithium, we drain ancient aquifers in the driest places on Earth. The communities who live there lose their water, their farms, their culture, and then the batteries go into luxury electric SUVs driven by people in Los Angeles and London who put "Save the Planet" stickers on their bumpers. That isn't a green revolution. That is an externality laundering operation. But the environmental damage isn't confined to South America. In Australia, hard rock lithium mining generates 3 times the carbon emissions of brine extraction. In Tibet, Chinese lithium mining has leaked hydrochloric acid into rivers, poisoning fish and killing livestock. In the Congo, artisanal cobalt mining, lithium's frequent companion in battery chemistry, involves children as young as 7 digging in unsafe conditions. And the damage isn't just physical, it is cultural. The Licanante people in Chile's Atacama have lived on their ancestral land for centuries. Their relationship with the water, the salt flats, the flamingos, the mountains, is not just economic. It is spiritual. The Earth Mother Goddess Pachamama guides their seasonal ceremonies when the water disappears. So does their civilization, not in some abstract future sense. Right now, the Kala peoples, whose territory is next in line for lithium exploitation, have heard the warnings from their neighbors. This is what has happened here, and this is what could happen to you. The Chilean Supreme Court has affirmed the state's duty to consult indigenous communities. Government agencies have filed claims asserting severe and irreversible ecological damage. But the mining continues because the world needs its batteries. The green transition is clean at the point of consumption and filthy at the point of extraction. And that dissonance is nail number 5, the price roller coaster. If you want to understand why the lithium industry is a trap, you have to understand the price cycle, because lithium doesn't behave like a normal commodity, it behaves like a manic depressive stock. In 2020, lithium carbonate traded at around $7,000 per ton. Then the EV boom hit. By late 2022, lithium carbonate in China peaked at over $80,000 per ton, an increase of more than 1,000% in 2 years. Every mining company on Earth started digging. Projects in Australia, Africa, and South America that had been mothballed suddenly came roaring back. Capital flooded in. New mines in Mali and Argentina came online. Existing producers expanded capacity as fast as they could build. Then the crash by February 2025. Lithium carbonate prices in North Asia had sunk to $9,550 per ton, their lowest level since 2021, a drop of nearly 90% from the peak. Global lithium carbonate output had surged 192% between 2020 and 2024. Supply exceeded demand by more than 150,000 metric tons in both 2023 and 2024. The result: mine closures across Australia, project cancellations in Canada, layoffs from Nevada to Zimbabwe. Companies that had invested billions based on $80,000 lithium were suddenly staring at $10,000 lithium. The second half of 2025 saw a rebound, with prices rising 56% from their January start position. But the damage was done. The scars on the industry's balance sheets don't heal because the spot price ticks up for a quarter. Roughly a third of global lithium production was estimated to be unprofitable at 2025 prices. Let that sink in. 1/3 of the world's lithium supply was losing money on every ton they produced. Imagine telling a farmer, "We need you to grow 10 times as much wheat." So the farmer mortgages everything, buys land, buys tractors, then you say, "Actually, wheat is worth 90% less than when you started, but we still need the wheat." Good luck. This boom-bust cycle isn't just bad for investors. It is catastrophic for the energy transition itself. Because lithium mines take 7 to 15 years to develop from discovery to production. When prices crash, projects get shelved. When projects get shelved, the supply that was supposed to come online in 2030 simply doesn't exist. And when demand keeps rising but supply doesn't follow, you get a shortage. The IEA says we need lithium supply to increase 7-fold by 2035 to meet climate goals. But the price crash of 2024 and 2025 killed or delayed the very projects that were supposed to deliver that supply. The trap isn't just geopolitical, it is temporal. The market sends investment signals that are permanently out of phase with the timeline needed to bring new supply online, which brings us to nail number 6, the technology mirage. Whenever you raise the alarm about lithium dependency, someone always says, "But what about alternative technologies? Sodium-ion batteries, solid-state batteries, hydrogen fuel cells. Surely we will innovate our way out of this, and that might happen eventually, but here is the cold math. Sodium-ion batteries are real. CATL has already started production. They are cheaper and use abundant materials, but their energy density is 30 to 40% lower than lithium-ion. That means a heavier battery for the same range for grid storage. That is fine. For a car you want to drive 300 miles. Not yet. Solid-state batteries promise higher energy density and faster charging. But they have been 5 years away for the last 15 years. Toyota, Samsung, and QuantumScape have all pushed back timelines. The technology works in laboratories. It does not yet work at mass production scale with the reliability and cost that the automotive industry demands. And here is what the technology optimists always miss. Even if a breakthrough happens tomorrow, it takes a decade to build the factories, supply chains, and infrastructure to deploy it at scale. We don't have a decade. The lithium dependency is baked in until at least 2035, probably 2040. Every EV battery factory being built right now, every grid storage contract being signed right now, every national energy plan being drafted right now, they all assume lithium. There is no plan B at scale, not yet. And the numbers make this crystal clear. China announced it would double EV charging capacity to 180 gigawatts by 2027. All lithium dependent, the EU mandates 45% emission cuts in trucks by 2030, needs lithium. The U.S. Inflation Reduction Act subsidizes domestic battery production, assumes lithium. India's production-linked incentive scheme pushes battery manufacturing. Requires lithium. Every single policy lever being pulled by every major economy on Earth is pulling in the same direction. More lithium, more batteries, more dependency on a supply chain that is controlled by China and extracted from deserts that are running out of water. And that means for the next 10 to 15 years, whoever controls lithium controls the green economy. Full stop. Speaking of energy, if you are finding this forensic deep dive valuable, the like button costs you 0 lithium. Hit subscribe if you want to be here for the next chapter, because the geopolitics of energy are only getting wilder from here. Now, where were we? Ah, yes. And here is a plot twist that nobody saw coming. The AI boom. Every major tech company is building data centers at a frantic pace. These data centers consume enormous amounts of electricity. That electricity increasingly needs to be backed by battery storage, which means lithium. Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Meta are collectively investing hundreds of billions of dollars in data center infrastructure. China's government just announced ambitious bets on power and data center infrastructure combined with higher power storage spending. Beijing stated it would double EV charging capacity to 180 gigawatts by 2027. The lithium demand equation just got a second variable. It isn't just about cars anymore. It is about the energy backbone of artificial intelligence. Every time you ask a question to a chatbot, every time a company trains a large language model, that electricity has to come from somewhere, and increasingly, that somewhere involves a lithium-ion battery storing solar or wind power. The AI revolution and the green revolution are converging on the same bottleneck. The scramble. This is nail number 7, the new colonial rush. When the world realized that the lithium supply chain was a choke point, governments did what governments always do. They panicked, and then they started writing checks. The United States, through the Inflation Reduction Act, allocated $369 billion for climate and energy projects, including domestic lithium mining and refining. The EU's Critical Raw Materials Act set a target of sourcing 40% of critical minerals from domestic or allied sources by 2030. Australia, Canada, Japan, South Korea, and European countries formed a mineral security partnership to secure non-Chinese supply. But here is the problem with a panic scramble. When everyone rushes for the same resource at the same time, they end up repeating the exact patterns they were trying to escape. China saw this coming years ago. While the West debated EV mandates, Chinese companies were already in Africa, Zimbabwe, the Congo, Mali, where new lithium mines are expected to produce over 40,000 tons of lithium carbonate equivalent by 2025. Chinese investment in African lithium mines is expected to increase production of lithium raw material more than 30-fold by 2027. Africa could account for 12% of global lithium supply by 2027. Up from 1% in 2022. And the majority of that growth is being funded by Chinese capital. So even when the West tries to diversify away from China, it keeps running into Chinese-owned mines. Ganfeng Lithium has stakes in projects across Argentina, Australia, Mexico, and Africa. Tianqi Lithium owns 51% of Greenbushes, Australia's largest lithium mine. Chinese companies are associated with 59% of global mined lithium supply, even though China itself only mines about 20% domestically. This is the new colonialism, dressed in green. Instead of taking gold and rubber, it is lithium and cobalt. The playbook is the same. Identify a resource in a developing country, offer capital that the local government desperately needs, secure off-take contracts and processing rights. Ship the raw material to your own refineries. Sell the finished product back to the world at a premium and the communities where the mining happens. They get the same deal indigenous communities have always gotten, the holes in the ground and the chemicals in the water. But there is a new twist in the 21st century version. It is dressed in the language of environmentalism. The marketing brochures don't say exploitation. They say partnership for the energy transition. They don't say resource extraction. They say critical mineral security. They don't say we need your lithium. They say we are helping you participate in the green economy. Different words, same holes in the ground, same water disappearing from the wells. This is nail number 8, the Bolivia problem, or the curse of the untouchable treasure. Bolivia deserves its own nail because it is the single most absurd case study in the entire lithium story. Bolivia sits on 23 million tons of lithium resources. That is tied for the most in the world. The Salar de Uyuni alone is estimated to contain 10 million tons. If Bolivia could extract and sell its lithium efficiently, it could transform one of the poorest countries in South America overnight. But Bolivia has extracted almost nothing, 600 tons in 2023, not 600,600. To put that in perspective, Australia produced 88,000 tons in 2024. Chile produced 49,000. Bolivia, sitting on the same amount of resources as Argentina, produced less lithium in an entire year than a medium-sized mine produces in a week. The story of why is a masterclass in how resource nationalism, political dysfunction, and geological bad luck can turn a jackpot into a prison sentence. In 2018, Bolivia signed a joint venture with a German company called ACI Systems. It collapsed within a year amid political turmoil when the government rescinded the legislation. In 2024, Bolivia signed an agreement with a Chinese consortium involving cattle to build a $90 million pilot plant. Progress has been glacial. The Bolivian government insists on maintaining state control over lithium extraction, which sounds great in a campaign speech but means that private capital, the only kind with the money and expertise to extract at scale, stays away. The geological challenges make it worse. Bolivia's brine has high magnesium content, which makes lithium extraction more complex and expensive. Meanwhile, Argentina next door has 7 operating lithium plants and is scaling fast. Chile is producing nearly 50,000 tons a year. Bolivia has the biggest pile of chips at the poker table and refuses to play a hand. The Bolivian government promised to generate $5 billion from lithium sales by 2025. The actual revenue has been a rounding error. This is what economists call the resource curse on steroids. When you have so much of something valuable that the politics of who controls it prevents anyone from actually using it. This is nail number 9. The recycling illusion. There is one more escape route that gets touted as the solution to all of this: recycling. Just recycle the lithium from old batteries, the argument goes, and you won't need to mine as much. And in theory, they are right. Lithium-ion batteries can be recycled and the recovered lithium can be reused. But here is the math that the optimists conveniently forget. The average EV battery lasts 8 to 15 years. The majority of electric vehicles on the road today were sold in the last 4 years. That means the avalanche of batteries to recycle hasn't arrived yet. It won't hit critical mass until the early to mid-2030s. Between now and then, almost all lithium must come from new mining. And even when recycling scales up, the economics are brutal. Lithium iron phosphate batteries, which are rapidly becoming the dominant chemistry, have a lower residual value after recycling than nickel-rich batteries. In Europe and the United States, LFP recycling is currently uneconomical. In China, it is already economical, but only because of China's scale, cheap energy, and lower labor costs. China is building enough LFP recycling capacity to be 2 times greater than potential supply by 2030. The West is not even close. So even in the recycling game, China is setting up to dominate. And the final kicker: even with maximum recycling, by 2030 you might recover 5 to 10% of the lithium you need. The other 90% still has to come out of the ground. Recycling is not a solution, it is a supplement, and it is a supplement that arrives too late to solve the crisis that is already here. Which brings us to the moment of truth. Nail number 10. The clock is ticking. The IEA has warned that lithium supply must increase 7-fold by 2035 to meet climate goals. The World Bank estimates that over $730 billion was invested in renewable power and storage in 2024 alone, but only a tiny fraction of that funded raw material supply. Everybody is buying the car. Nobody is building the gas station. The numbers tell a terrifying story. Global lithium consumption in 2024 was estimated at 220,000 tons. Demand grew 29% year over year. Production was 240,000 tons. That is a narrow surplus of just 20,000 tons. Fast Markets projects that surplus shrinks to just 10,000 tons in 2025 and swings to a 1,500-ton deficit in 2026. But those projections assume all existing mines keep running. They assume no further production cuts. They assume no geopolitical disruptions. They assume China doesn't reimpose export controls when the one-year suspension expires in November 2026. That is a lot of assumptions for the most critical mineral in the global economy. And remember, new mines take 7 to 15 years to develop. Even if every lithium project currently planned gets approved, funded, built, and brought online perfectly, many analysts believe we still won't have enough lithium by 2030 to meet demand. The United States produced just 615 tons of lithium in 2023. That supplied less than 1% of domestic demand. Only 44.7% of U.S. lithium demand is met by domestic production, even when including Canadian supply. The Thacker Pass mine in Nevada, which could become the largest lithium mine in North America, faced years of legal challenges and protests before breaking ground. The timeline from discovery to production for a major lithium project in the United States, with environmental reviews, permitting, legal challenges, and construction, can easily stretch to 12 to 15 years. China can do it in 3 to 5. That is not a criticism of environmental regulation. Those regulations exist for good reason. But it is a statement of fact about competitive disadvantage. When your competitor can build a refinery in the time it takes you to complete an environmental impact assessment, you don't have a strategy problem. You have a math problem. This is the final collapse. The moment the trap snaps shut. History teaches us that resource dependency is the quietest form of surrender. You don't hear the chains being placed. You feel them when you try to move. The West woke up to the lithium trap sometime around 2022. That is when prices spiked, supply chains cracked, and governments realized that their green energy plans were built on a foundation they didn't control. Since then, there has been a lot of noise, billions in subsidies, summits, partnerships, executive orders, but the numbers have barely moved. China controlled roughly 60% of lithium refining in 2022. By 2030, the IEA projects China will still control nearly 60% of all critical mineral refining. $369 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act. Mineral security partnerships across 3 continents. 4 years of urgent rhetoric. And the needle has barely moved because the trap was set 20 years ago. And closing a 20-year gap in 3 years isn't ambitious. It is delusional. The incentive structure right now is the most dangerous configuration possible. Every country needs lithium. No country outside China has enough processing capacity. The countries with the largest reserves either can't extract it, Bolivia, or are being bought out by Chinese companies, Africa. The price signals discourage investment. The environmental costs are borne by the poorest communities, and the clock to 2030, the year most climate plans hinge on, is ticking. This is not a supply chain problem. It is a civilizational bottleneck, and nobody is in charge of fixing it. The verdict, so here we are. The lithium trap isn't a future risk. It is a present reality, and the bill is already being written. The world bet its entire climate strategy on electrification. Electrification depends on batteries. Batteries depend on lithium. Lithium depends on a supply chain controlled by one country. And that country has already demonstrated its willingness to use that control as leverage. Here is the final bill for the lithium trap. 1. Concentration. One country controls 65 to 70% of lithium refining, 75% of battery cell production, and over 80% of key battery components. It holds less than 8% of reserves but commands the entire middle of the supply chain. 2. Vulnerability. A 40% lithium supply shortfall is projected by 2035 under current policies, the very policies that are supposed to save the planet. By 2030, demand is expected to hit 3.7 million tons. Current production capacity cannot get there. 3. Environmental devastation. 65% of water in Chile's Atacama region consumed. 30% reduction in water levels in the Salar de Atacama. Indigenous communities displaced from ancestral lands, ecosystems irreversibly damaged. Rivers dried up, flamingos disappearing. All in the name of a green revolution that doesn't feel very green from the bottom of a dry well. 4. Price instability. A 90% price crash from the 2022 peak to the 2025 trough, killing the very investments needed to build future supply. A boom-bust cycle that guarantees chronic underinvestment in the exact infrastructure the world needs most. 5. Time deficit. New lithium mines take 7 to 15 years to develop. The supply needed by 2030 should have been greenlit in 2020. It wasn't, and no amount of money can buy back time. 6. The recycling gap. Battery recycling won't reach meaningful scale until the mid-2030s, and even then, it will supplement, not replace, new mining between now and then. We are fully dependent on the mines. There will be summits, there will be partnerships, there will be billions more in subsidies. But there is no subsidy large enough to compress time. You cannot fast forward a mine from discovery to production. You cannot build a refinery with a press release. You cannot diversify a supply chain with a handshake agreement. And you cannot undo 20 years of Chinese strategic investment with 3 years of urgent speeches. The lithium trap is the most honest metaphor for the green transition itself. The intentions are good, the physics are real, the economics are ruthless, and the people who pay the highest price are always the ones who live closest to the ground. The farmer in Chile whose well ran dry so a tech executive in Berlin can drive an electric Porsche. The indigenous family in Argentina whose river stopped flowing so a factory in Guangzhou can stamp out battery cells. The Bolivian community sitting on a fortune they will never see because their government can't get out of its own way. The mineral that was supposed to save the world might just end up being the mineral that reveals how the world really works. Who mines, who processes, who profits, and who drinks the poison water? The green revolution isn't a lie, but it is built on a foundation that nobody bothered to audit until now. And when you do audit it, when you actually follow the money, follow the water, follow the supply chain from the salt flat to the showroom, you find a system that looks less like a revolution and more like a rearrangement. The same old patterns of extraction and dependency wrapped in new packaging. If you found this forensic deep dive valuable, hit that like button. It helps this video cut through the algorithm and reach the people who need to understand what their electric car is actually made of. Subscribe if you want to be here for the next audit, because the green economy isn't just a story about batteries. It is a story about power, real power, the kind that flows through wires and the kind that sits behind a desk in Beijing. I'll see you in the comments. And remember, economics isn't just about money. It is about who controls the future.